Hey there, my friend. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going over all of the public domain Bibles. Now, you might be wondering, Ryan, why use a public domain Bible? Why not use just any ordinary Bible? Well, if you want the full answer, go back and check out this video here where I explain why I'm having to choose a public domain Bible in a more complete context. But the short answer is simply that I was filming Bible videos where I was reading a chapter of the Bible one at a time and putting stock footage over the top. And then I found out that with most Bibles, you cannot do that because they are under copyright laws. And so I reached out to two different publishing companies, one for the New King James and one for the ESV. And I was denied by both to be able to read the Bible on YouTube in that capacity. And so that has led me to the point where I've had to do some research on all of the public domain Bibles, see what my options are, and then choose one. And so to anyone who watched the first video, this is the follow-up to that one, and I'm kind of going to explain my reasoning on why I chose the Bible that I did. Now, I want to say thank you to everyone who commented on that video because they gave me lots of different ideas. They made suggestions of good translations. And so I want to say thank you. And so if I did not choose the one you recommended, it was not anything out of spite or any kind of ill will. I just simply had to make an educated decision after doing my own research. And so that's what we're going to get into now. So I'm going to throw up a chart on the screen. This is a chart I made of the 9 different public domain Bibles I could find. 8 of these are pretty common in the public domain, and then there was one that was kind of an extra that a commenter left for me. So we're going to start off with the King James Version, the Old Faithful. And what I have done here, well, first, let me back up. Let me start by explaining my criteria for choosing my Bible. So my criteria for these public domain Bibles was I wanted the translation to be done by a committee and not by a single person. Because if it is one person translating it, there is a much higher risk for bias to come through the translation. And so if there is a team of scholars, and I prefer actual biblical scholars and linguists who know what they're doing, they understand the original languages, and they are working as a team to help remove any bias and translate the word faithfully and correctly. So that is criteria number 1. Number 2, I want it based on the original languages. And so what I mean is that if it is a translation, if it's an English translation where they are simply translating from a previous English translation, for me, that's not good enough because you're putting one extra layer between your text, and the original source material. That is actually the complaint that most people have when it comes to the Bible, is they think that we translate it like this. They think that it was originally in Greek and Hebrew, and then we translate it into Latin, and then we translate it into Spanish, and then into English, and then back into Spanish, and then back into English. So people think that's what we're doing. And there are some English translations that do that, where they simply translate from a previous translation. What most people don't understand is that the vast majority of modern Bible translations are translated directly from the Greek and the Hebrew, which is actually a huge plus for us because there is only one translation in between the original and the Bible in our hands. So that's actually a fantastic thing and a good defense for our faith and for the believability of the Word of God. Criteria number 3, obviously, is just that they are simply in the public domain. There is one on this list that is a little kind of iffy. I'll explain that when I get there. And then number 4, something that is theologically safe, something that has been trusted by generations, or at least held in very high esteem and good regard, and has a good standing. I don't want something that feels like there's potential for something to go wrong. I want as close a translation as I can get. Now, I want to be clear. If I had my choice, I don't think I would choose any of these 9 translations for my primary daily use. And realistically, I wish that I could choose a different translation for the project I'm about to start up again here very soon. The one that was shut down by the Christian publishing companies. So, just with that caveat, none of these are my top choices for what I would like to use. But I'm choosing the best with what is available in the public domain. That way I can read God's word on YouTube without facing any kind of legal backlash. All right, so now let's jump back into the King James Version. So I have separated these Bibles into 4 different categories. That is their type, which for the most part, every single one of these Bibles is more on the word for word side of things, which is where I tend to feel more comfortable. The other end of the spectrum is thought for thought, which is more trying to capture what the author meant. I tend to think that word for word is a little bit better simply because it is easier to read the word for word and then go study the Greek if something doesn't make sense to get the author's intent. I think it's more difficult to take the thought for thought, to take the idea of what someone is saying, and you're hoping that they translated their idea correctly, but you're missing out on some of the original words that were used. And after it's been translated, there's not necessarily a great way for you to go back and study that, in my humble opinion. So I tend to lean more towards word for word. I hope that made sense. But all 9 of these are more or less they're pretty far on the word for word side of things. The next category is going to be the team. How many people worked on this translation? Was it an individual or was it 40 or 50 biblical scholars? Next, we have the language. What language is it in? And even within English, are we talking modern English or super old, ancient, archaic English? And then lastly, on the far right column, I just have a one extra note for me to keep in mind on each of these translations. So I know that was a long setup. Thank you for bearing with me. Let's now jump into the King James. So King James is a word-for-word translation. It was translated by roughly 50 scholars, though I will say, depending on the source, it sometimes ranged between 40 and 50, but somewhere around, it seems like the high 40s is a pretty solid number, maybe 50. It is translated into English, though it is a more archaic form of English, obviously, probably the most archaic on this list. So that is one disadvantage. When you are reading through the King James, many things cannot come across the right way, simply because English has changed in the last 400 years since the King James was written. I know there have been some revisions to the King James, but as far as I can tell, I believe a lot of the primary, original text remains the same. So there is a little bit of a language barrier, even though it is within the realm of English still. One side note for the King James would simply be that the King James has a lot of staying power, and it has been trusted for centuries. Even if it is a bit dated. Even to this day, you have people who are King James only. I disagree with King James only. I think it is... I understand certain points from the King James only crowd. I'm not going to get into that today, but I think as a whole, they're standing on a hill that is not worth fighting on, in my personal opinion. There have been countless more manuscripts discovered, including the Dead Sea Scrolls, back in the late 1900s, that are crucial to us having a better and more robust understanding of the scriptures and what was in them. So, King James, not perfect. There is no perfect English translation. The perfect Word of God would be in the original Greek and Hebrew. So, King James, good in that regard, but there are some problems. Next, we have the American Standard Version. So this is a very strict word for word, though not the strictest on the list. The team that put together the ASV was a committee of 30 scholars, which is pretty good. It is slightly archaic English, but it is also more readable and more modern when compared to the King James. The American Standard Version, I think, officially came out in 1901, I believe, or at least that's the version that most people read. And then one side note I found pop up several places was that the ASV is often referred to as a rock of biblical honesty. So that is a great a great thing to be said about your translation, that it is held in high regard for being honest and authentic to the original word. So that's a good thing for the ASV. All right, next we have the Darby translation. Darby is very literal, word for word. It was only translated, though, by one person. That was John Nelson Darby. The language is also considered to be semi-archaic. And one note, though, and it's a bit of a red flag for me, is just that John Nelson Darby has some baggage in his history. There are a lot of people in the church who don't like him, specifically because of his ties to the pre-tribulation rapture, and many believe that he is the one who began the movement of the pre-tribulation rapture. That's a conversation for another day. But because of that, I'd like to stay away, likely stay away from his. Next, let's move on to the Young's literal translation. This is an extreme word for word. My pastor actually told me this is so word for word that it kind of reads really awkwardly at times. That's how word for word it is. This Bible was also only translated by a single translator, that is Robert Young. The language is English, but it is a very rigid word for word English. Now, one positive thing about the Young's translation is that it works very hard to keep the original Greek and Hebrew grammar intact. So it's trying to get you as close as you can to the Greek and Hebrew, but sometimes possibly to a fault in certain areas. Next, we have the DRA translation, which is more literal, and it is from the Latin. It was translated by a small group of Catholic scholars. It is Old English, and it is historically very important for the Catholics in regards to tradition. Next, we have the World English Bible. This is a word for word that is based on the ASV. The team that put it together was kind of a modern collaborative volunteer project. So think of it as like... I want to say this nicely without making it sound bad, but it's almost like a online group of individuals came together and they did like a group project to bring this together based on the ASV. So not directly from the original languages, but from the ASV translation. One positive, though, is that the World English Bible reads in modern English, so it is very readable. One note, though, would be that because it was not translated by a group of scholars, it is typically considered to be less academic, and it is not held in the same regard as other translations because of the translation process. Next, we have the RVA, which is a word for word. There were 49 biblical scholars. This one, unfortunately for me, is in Spanish. So I don't speak Spanish other than a few words like Tortuga. But that's about it. So not a good translation for me. But one note on this translation is that it is the Spanish equivalent of the King James Version. So if you're watching this and you are a Spanish speaker and you have never read this translation, it might be worth checking out, at least simply for the historical aspect of it. So there you go. Next, we have the Latin Vulgate. So this is a Latin translation of the Greek and Hebrew. The primary translator it's mostly attributed to Saint Jerome, but there may have been a handful of others helping, but he would have been the primary translator. Language is Latin, so once again, I don't speak Latin, so this is not a good translation for me. And one cool note would be that the Latin Vulgate was used for over 1,000 years in churches. That is quite the shelf life. Very impressive. Now, the last Bible on this list is the Berean. So this is a slightly more loose word-for-word translation. I could not find an exact number of scholars or linguists that worked on this, but it did say there was a committee of some kind. I just don't know to what extent that is. Are we talking a committee of 5 people or 50 people? Who knows? So I would have liked a little bit more transparency on that. If you happen to know, leave a comment down below just so we can know moving forward. The language is modern English, and then it has slightly less historical weight and integrity compared to the ASV and the King James Version. So there you go. That is my chart on these 9 Bible translations. Now I want to walk you through how I decided to decide on which Bible translation I'm going to use going forward for my specific project on YouTube. So let's start with my criteria number 1. So it is a committee translation, not one person. So right off the bat, that is going to remove the Darby translation, the Young's literal translation, and the Latin Vulgate. Next, I want to make sure the translation was from the original languages and not a translation of a previous English translation. And so that removes the World English Bible from the list. I wanted them to be in public domain. So the Berean Bible is actually technically not public domain. Now, that said, the Berean Bible is in their front pages next to the copyright, it does say that you are free to use this Bible for any purposes you like. So there is reason to believe I could safely use the Berean Bible. I think for my own conscience, I wanted something where I just felt like it is completely free in the public domain and no copyright. Not to mention that point number 4, I wanted something theologically safe that has a higher regard. And to me, there are better options on this list than the Berean in terms of their trust throughout history. And so for those 2 reasons, I removed the Berean. And so at that point, that brought me down to the King James Version, the ASV, the DRA, and the RVA. Now, for obvious reasons, I can't use the RVA because I don't speak Spanish, so I had to get rid of that one. And then for the DRA, I apologize to my Catholic friends, but just for me personally, in my own convictions, I didn't feel comfortable reading something that had a strong Catholic ties to it. I wanted something that had a little bit more of a Protestant backing behind it. I mean, no disrespect. That's just where I'm coming from. So I had to remove that one. All right, and so that left me with my 2 final translations, the American Standard Version and the King James Version. Now, I want to explain why I did not use the American Standard Version. So, for me, one of the biggest issues was actually that the American Standard Version seems to have a little bit more difficulty getting access to it nowadays. It is not regularly printed. It is more of a print on demand. It is not that you can't get the American Standard Version, but you don't know who you're going to be getting it from. And it might be a small distributor. It might be a weird copy. The Bible itself may be organized very weird, depending on who you get it from. Those were all some of the things I found. Now, if you could find an old family friend who had an ASV lying around, that's probably a good one. But in general, I wanted something that was still easily accessible to get a good print of the Bible. Now, in many regards, I would have liked to have used the ASV simply because of the more modern, slightly more modern English to it. Not to mention that there would have been 300 more years of manuscripts to work with compared to the KJV. But all that said, I decided to go with the King James Version, and there are a couple reasons I did that. So, this Bible right here, this is my dad's King James Version. So the King James Version is the only Bible on this list that I have actually spent any time reading myself. So I have some personal familiarity with it. Now, I don't read the King James very often, but from time to time I do. Last year, I spent about a whole month reading out the King James with my daily reading, just for the fun of it. There's a lot to be said about the King James in regards to its staying power. And again, I'm not a King James only, but I think for all of us, we have to admit that the fact that after over 400 years, the King James Version is still considered to be a very well-trusted translation shows just how good of a translation it was, even if it is a little outdated in certain parts today. Now, for myself, there will probably be a few hiccups going forward using this, just because some of the language doesn't quite match with how we do it today. So I will do my best to work with that. But I am ready to get started on my Bible project again. So like I said, my old project was me reading the Bible chapter by chapter and putting stock footage over the top. I have a new plan now, a new visual style. I've been doing a lot of pixel art drawing, and I'm excited to show you guys what I have coming forward. But I'm going to have a new style going forward that will allow me to read the Bible chapter by chapter with a public domain Bible, and I won't have to worry about any kind of copyright laws or anything like that. So I'm ready to move forward with it. And for anyone watching, I hope that this video was at least helpful. If you're a creative or you're on YouTube and you want to read large chunks of the Bible, I hope this list will help you choose a Bible that works for you. Maybe I'll even link it in the description if you want, just so you can take a look at this chart if that's helpful to you. But for the average person, if you are just reading a verse or two here or there, or a small passage, there is typically no issue with copyright when it comes to reading a Bible. For me, the issue is that my plan is to read it in chapter chunks. So read the entire chapter and then entire books. And then, if the Lord doesn't come back by the time I finish this, I'd like to work on, over the next couple decades, probably work on getting through the entire Bible. And maybe at some point, if God ever blesses me with a team to work with, then maybe we could accomplish that faster. But that is my goal. So I hope this was informational. I thank you again to everyone who watched the last video and for your comments. Again, I mean no ill will if I did not choose the Bible translation you recommended. I just had to do my own research and sit down and really kind of wrestle through it. I feel at peace about using the King James, and I feel good about it in my spirit. And so I'm ready to move forward with this project so I can finally get back to what I want to do. So with that, my friends, thank you so much for your time. God bless. Take care, and we'll see you soon. Adios.